I want to talk to you about one of my favorite symbols, one of my favorite entities on the entire left-hand path. Baphomet, one that you've more than likely at least heard of at some point. I want to start by saying I know full well some people will disagree with my pronunciation of the name, favoring the more French Baphomet. I've spent years calling it Baphomet. We'll keep up with that personal tradition today, but you can use either. It won't hurt anything for this discussion. Now, this will come in two parts. Eventually we want to do an actual quest where we'll encounter Baphomet, but for now I want to just discuss the history and the symbolism of this extraordinary entity, and then next time we will go on a quest, we'll hopefully have an encounter, and we'll come back to our regularly scheduled reality where we can look at implementing whatever we come out of that with. So, for now, the history and symbolism. I want to ask, what do you know about Baphomet? You've probably seen at least one very popular rendition known as the Sigil of Baphomet. Although derived from much older imagery, which you can see here, this sigil or seal became well known when Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan in 1966, used it on the cover of several of his books, which you'll see here, and made it the official symbol of the Church of Satan. It's since been adopted as a symbol of the largely political and theatrical Satanic Temple, which has used it to challenge separation of church and state issues in many states. That said, you may wonder, why would I even want to have an encounter with a symbol so established with the Satanic movement in the West? Well, let's take a look at Baphomet prior to Anton LaVey. A supposed satanic connection emerged much further back, and for that we can look to the Catholic Church, particularly during the era of the Crusades. The Knights Templar had grown vastly powerful and vastly wealthy in Christian Europe, and as the Crusades wound down, the political powers in Europe wanted to get a hold of some money. Instead of borrowing it from the Templars, who had become basically the bankers of Europe, the King of France, King Philip, decided, why borrow it when we can take it? And he eventually got Pope Clement V on board, who went on to disband the Knights and actively persecute them. Now, they raised numerous allegations against them, but most pertinent to this discussion has been that of idolatry, heresy, the Church's favorite charge to leverage against its perceived enemies or the people that it wants its adherents to perceive as enemies. And in using one of the Church's favorite methods for extracting confessions, torture, several Templars confessed to idolatry and even named their idol. You guessed it, Baphomet. Now, no physical images of Baphomet had been found or revealed, but many descriptions cited a head, severed, usually with several faces, 2 or 3, made of various materials. I can't help but think that the 3-faced head could have been a jab at the standing Catholic and overall Christian doctrine of the Trinity, the three-in-one nature of God, the Godhead. Many who confessed stated that they had never seen the idol, but had only heard of it. Since this had nothing to do with finding heretics, or very little, details and discrepancies probably didn't mean a whole lot. Some modern scholarship suggests that Baphomet had actually been a bastardization of the name Muhammad, which you see here in italics. Of course, Muhammad had been the founder of the Islamic religion, which had been the very religion that the Crusaders, including the Templars, had been fighting against for a long, long time. This would paint a picture of the Templars desirable for the Church, making them not only idolaters, but traitors in a both spiritual and political sense. Only in 1858 did a visual depiction emerge of the infamous Baphomet, which you'll see here, in occultist Eliphas Levi's book, Transcendental Magic. Now, you'll see here a photo of a three-dimensional representation of that illustration, and you'll note in this depiction the prominent head of a goat. And by the time Levi released his vision of Baphomet, the goat had become somewhat underappreciated and even feared among the dominant Abrahamic faiths, Christianity in particular, and the still relatively recent satanic panic of the 1980s created a general discomfort with such symbols that in some locales and in the hearts and minds of many individuals continues to create a general sense of discomfort. But we can learn a lot from Baphomet, and Levi's depiction of it, one very rich in symbolism. With that in mind, let's take Baphomet as a serious figure, one that we can learn something from. I want to look at some of these examples, and we'll begin with some of those discussed in Lewis Spence's Encyclopedia of Occultism. He writes, the torch placed between the two horns represents equilibrating intelligence. Equilibrium, a word often taken to mean a condition of stasis, but which instead I take as a condition allowing one to excel. Harmony having been realized, equilibrium promotes direction of attention and focus to higher and greater ambitions than mere survival or existence. The goat's head, he writes, represents the exclusive responsibility of matter. I say, true, but it also represents the stubborn, persistent, go-to-it attitude required of those who seriously travel the left-hand path. We cannot get caught up in worrying about pleasing others when we have so much of the self to explore, discover, and understand. Spence continues with the hands, human hands, which exhibit the sanctity of labor. He writes, they make the sign of esotericism above and below to impress mystery on initiates, and they point at two lunar crescents, the upper being white and the lower black, to explain the correspondences of good and evil, mercy and justice. I'd like to comment on that a bit. When we speak of the phrase, well circulated in occult circles, as above, so below, remember also the related but much less frequently recited as within, so without. Keep in mind the immense power you have to influence your perceptions, feelings, and responses to things, and know that these have a ripple effect which impacts and affects things beyond yourself. This has been key to my understanding of Aleister Crowley's definition of magic, which he referred to as the science and art of causing change in conformity with will. Now look at also at the arms of Baphomet, where we see inscribed the words solve and coagula. Now these refer to an alchemical formula which requires dissolving or breaking down of something before coagulating or building it up into something new, improved, and refined. This process applies all the more to ourselves. Spence observes the lower part of the body having a veil, which you can see here, portraying the mysteries of universal generation, expressed solely by the symbol of the caduceus. Now this veiled portion reminds me of the occult, which literally means hidden, and the mysterious aspects of reality and of the self. An ever-present reminder of the need to continue seeking, discovering, and transforming. A lot of times we want to make those changes, those transformations to the things around us, to the circumstances we find ourselves in. But the most effective magic, as one author has noted, takes place by transforming first and foremost the self. So keep that in mind. Spence reminds us of the belly of the goat having scales, and this reminds me of the water element. You see, Baphomet includes so many things, so many symbols, and we'll discuss some of the other elemental qualities that we see put into Baphomet, or at least this depiction, in a short while. Now, Spence also draws our attention to the fact that the goat has female breasts. It says that its only human characteristics are those of maternity and toil. Remember the hands. Otherwise, the signs of redemption. So here he implies, who cares for one's own redemption or progress? Oneself. Now, to comment further on this, we see a balance between this feminine aspect and the masculine, which we see in the previously mentioned caduceus, which doubles as a penis. Between this and the also previously mentioned light and dark moons, which we don't see in the statue, but clearly do in Levy's drawing, we begin to see a yin-yang quality about Baphomet. Only by perceiving, acknowledging, and accepting this duality can we acquaint ourselves with the different parts, those dual aspects or those polar opposites, and utilize them to enhance each other and to enhance ourselves. In getting acquainted with these and interacting with them, we can better determine how and when to use those various qualities. On Baphomet's forehead, between the horns and beneath the torch, we see the sign of the microcosm, or the pentagram, as Spence writes, with one beam or point in the ascendant, or in the upright position, symbol of human intelligence, which, placed thus below the torch, makes the flame of the latter an image of divine revelation. Now, if we consider the goat's head as composed of 5 points, the 2 horns, the 2 ears, and the beard, with 2 pointing upward, the horns, we also see balance brought into focus here. Now, I mentioned already the water element represented by the scales of on the Baphomet's stomach, but we also see here air represented nicely, the wings. We see fire represented in the aforementioned torch, and we see earth represented in the form of the goat and the earth on which Baphomet sits. We do well to remember that we each have all of these elements within us. Air relates to intellect, water to emotions and relationships, fire to creative ability, and earth to material manifestations. We can improve ourselves by looking at our strengths and weaknesses in each area, and again, seeing how these can interact with one another, becoming acquainted with them, determining how we can use them individually together to enhance ourselves as whole beings. So really, this summarizes some of the symbolic significance of Baphomet. This has not been a total analysis of this deeply significant entity, but it should give you an idea that we can learn a lot about it and about ourselves through it, which makes it very valuable and powerful. I suggest using this powerful symbol kind of like an ink blot. Get yourself into a meditative state of mind. Once you've done so, look over the symbol. Don't think about it too much, but see what draws your attention. What captures your attention the most? Focus on that aspect of Baphomet. Ponder what that symbol or aspect of Baphomet means, and most importantly, what it means to you. How do you measure against this aspect? What strengths and weaknesses do you have in that particular area? And how can you improve in that regard? By doing this, the Baphomet can truly become a symbol and tool of lifelong self-analysis, self-awareness, and self-transformation. On that note, I'll wrap this up. Next time, we'll work on an encounter with the Baphomet. Stay tuned for that. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe for updates, which you'll see regularly, and make sure to follow the social media accounts listed below in the description for daily, regular updates on all things self-transformative. Until then, folks, have a great day and keep transforming.